we have been having these forums around the state, as you all are certainly aware, regarding our infrastructure and bridges and sewers and roads. And this is of such great importance to us all, as we know. We just wanted to get some input from the stakeholders in all the regions so we could basically put together a comprehensive plan in order to figure out what the success or what successes and failures we have had, or the major concerns throughout the state, and then ultimately allocate funds appropriately. So with that being said, we certainly look forward to hearing from you all. If my colleague, Mr. Smith, would like to say a few words, and of course, introduce maybe the rest of our colleagues from the Assembly.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tony. Again, I want to echo what Assemblyman Palumbo said. Thank you all for being here. The way that we host these forums is a little bit different than other parts of the state. It's more of a conversation across a kitchen table. We want to hear real input, and we may ask some follow-up questions if it's appropriate to get more information. So joining us today, the two co-chairs of the New York State Assembly Minority Infrastructure Task Force and Transportation Task Force are Assemblyman Phil Palmisano and Assemblymember Kevin Byrne. And we're also here in Assemblymember Mike Fitzpatrick's district here in Smithtown. So thank you so much. If you want to say a couple words.
My name's Kevin Byrne. I'm the Assemblyman for New York's 94th Assembly District, which includes portions of northern Westchester and Putnam County. I did not drive quite as far as my colleague Phil Palmisano to my right. He had the journey of the day, but we have been traveling the state. We were in Syracuse and Binghamton area, listening to stakeholders, listening to the challenges that so many people face when it comes to our transportation system, our local infrastructure, our state infrastructure, our roads, our sewer systems. It's not just the financial piece of this is very important, but it also covers the regulatory burdens that many of our local municipal leaders are facing, and what we can do to make this work better for you, whether it's CHIPS or some other state program. We want to make sure that we hear your concerns, and I know at the end of this we're going to be compiling a report that we can deliver to the governor and to Speaker Hasty as well. And for that, I want to introduce my colleague, Phil Palmisano, who's been my battle buddy traveling the state the better part of the last month.
Thank you, Kevin. And I just want to say thank you very much for opening your doors and for your hospitality. It was a long drive, but it was a great drive down. And just want to say thank you to my colleagues up here with me for helping put this together. Again, just to reiterate, the purpose of this task force is to get valuable input for you. And that's why we thank you for taking the time to come out here today to share with us your thoughts, your concerns, things that we can do better. And that's going to be very valuable to us as we put this report together for next year that we're going to be sharing with the governor and our legislative colleagues in both houses. Because when you see reports that the comptroller's report just came out recently where, look at the bridge deficiencies in New York State. Just on the local side of things, $27.4 billion. Statewide, we're looking at about $75.4 billion. With ranking reports that come out from CNBC when it talked about being ranked for business, and it says New York has the seventh worst infrastructure in the entire country. We've made some progress in some areas. We continue to fight for funding, particularly some of the concerns that we've heard at some of our meetings already is a focus on local infrastructure, which certainly resonates with the local property taxpayer. We've had some success over the past 5-6 years trying to drive more money into our local communities so they can decide which roads and bridges and culverts to address. And hopefully from your feedback and input, we'll be able to come through with a good plan that we will share and press for, because certainly infrastructure touches everything we do, whether it's economic development, our tourism, our safety for our first responders. I know we have some of our first responders that are here. All those things are critical that we address, and that's what the purpose of this will be, and we look forward to hearing your input. So we have a list of people that registered to speak and some others who came earlier, and after we're done, we'll just open it up for anyone in the audience who we didn't call. Please just come forward. So we're going to start with our very first person. We're going to start with Paul Pressman from Silo. Mr. Pressman?
There's a lot of things. As most people know in this room, my biggest thing is with the bus system in Suffolk County. I know there's a lot more to infrastructure than just the bus system. But I think one of the main things that people need to realize throughout the state is that Suffolk County is not like any other county at all. Suffolk County is such a big county. It encompasses so much land. It's bigger than some states. And I think that a lot of things get lost, in that. I think the governor is very big on the MTA, and the MTA serves a purpose. But, and the first responders and everybody else, everybody's going to complain about congestion on the roadway. Well, to get congestion off the roadway, the idea is that if you had a public system that people could use buses and you can move more people with one vehicle than having all these other vehicles on the road, you wouldn't be spending all this money to redo roads, to redo everything else. I mean, Mr. Balone came up with this whole BRT thing from, on the 110 corridor, which is a big thing. I just came on a bus to get here. It took 25 minutes to get through the heartland because the way it is set up with the way the train comes through, the way the lights are set up, it took 25 minutes to get through there. The county gives the bus driver 10 minutes to get there. I'm not going to tell you what he did after that. He got here on time. But that's what happens. And it gets all lost. And we have 300,000 people that are disabled. I'm disabled. I'm medically disabled, but I get around. And a lot of other people do that. And a lot of other people do not want to have to take a SCAT service, which is the paratransit that you have. Because the problem is, it becomes a cost factor. We all know how much the government gives on Social Security disability. There's a lot of issues, that go into this whole infrastructure. There's been a whole big thing about redoing, developers coming in and redoing and building up the heartland. There was a whole big thing they want to rebuild and do a whole thing on Conklin Avenue by 110. Well, now the MTA is kind of backing away from that. And we don't have the bus service to do that. That was the whole idea of a BRT system, but the buses don't run. This is the only county where a bus runs every hour. Even up in Buffalo and in other areas, they have better bus service. We have 1.5 million people. So does Nassau County. Why do we get so much less money from the state than any other county? I was working with Senator Croce before he got fed up and decided to go back in with the military. And I know he went to Albany and he tried a few different ways because I had asked for $20 million so we could get a better bus service. And the legislators here actually asked DPW to come up with a number. It took them a week and a half to come up with $18.5 million. It took me 30 seconds off the top of my head to come up with $20 million. And I know it was brought up. There was a lot of things, and I'm not going to get into politics, but it needs to be a bipartisan thing. It really does. It doesn't matter anymore, Democrat, Republican. This is a human issue. This is public transportation, whether it's bridges, whether it's the roads, it's for the public. That's what we pay our taxes for. We're a very taxed, county, and I don't see what we're getting for it. I really don't. I worked for 30 years of my life. I paid all the taxes I was supposed to pay. I did not work off the books. For what I get in Social Security right now, I'm at the poverty line that I have to fight to get food stamps, which is ridiculous. I want to go back to work. Nobody wants to hire me. They tell me I have too big of a mouth. But it is what it is. The point is, I've been doing this for 5 years. I've been living in Suffolk County since 1968. Do you know that they have not changed one bus schedule? Now, you can't tell me in 50 years that we don't have more cars on the road. I know for a fact I see more accidents. It's ridiculous. First responders can't get anywhere. I live near 2 hospitals. They can't get anywhere. To even come down, to come down my block, to get through, even on Sunrise Highway. How long did it take? They had to make a whole express lane. And it's getting worse. And it's now going out into the East End. And nothing is being done. Everybody talks about doing everything, but nothing gets done. I just don't understand how you can put billions and billions into the MTA, and I'm not saying that you don't need a train system. But how many train terminals do you need in New York City? And why is that like everything revolves around the MTA? Suffolk County has enough people here that know what to do if they're given a chance. But they never are. The governor decides this, that, the other thing, and, we already know that Suffolk County is not his favorite county. And we'll leave it at that.
Well, can I ask a quick follow-up question? So,
Yeah.
As far as if you could explain to my colleagues from other parts of the state how individuals with disabilities use our SCAT bus system here in Suffolk. Now, you've explained that the funding of that is largely state-funded.
Well, no, basically, to be honest with you, a lot of the funding comes from the federal government. And as a matter of fact, the county went out, and this is on the state as well, I'm sorry to say, but the state put out a list of acceptable buses and manufacturers that you can buy from, with your grant money. And the buses that were bought, they were never shown to the general public. They were never shown to Silo, which is a big advocacy group that helps people with disabilities get the resources that are available to them. And what ended up happening was I had a big fight, and I went to the Federal Transportation Administration in Washington, D.C., and I filed an ADA lawsuit against these buses. And I'm still waiting for an answer. I did not get one yet. And the last I heard was that they, quote unquote, meet the minimum. The problem is we have stuff on videotape of a lady who's a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and they can't get the wheelchair on the bus. That's an ADA violation. And everybody puts it up to, we'll do better next time.
Now, as far as the timing and the routes that you said that they're only allowed to use the same routes that our Suffolk buses go, is that right? Something along those lines?
Oh, well, no. What happened was there was a federal grant that we got that at one time on the SCAT buses for Sunday service, and the way it was set up was you could only get a SCAT bus if you lived within 3/4 of a mile of where one of the regular line haul buses in the county ran. Now, for a county this big, we have 40 line haul buses. And the other issue is these buses, most of them stop at 6, 7 at night. Where is it fair for people with disabilities that would like to have some sort of quality of life that it's 7 o'clock at night? I can't stay till the end of this meeting at 9 o'clock because the last bus comes out of here at 8:30. Otherwise, I can't get home. And if I was on the South Shore, where the bus along Montauk Highway does run till 9:30 at night, but when I get to Babylon and I want to go home, my bus stops at 7:30. I mean, where is the fairness in that? We're not asking for 24-hour service. I'm not asking for buses like the MTA runs. They get money left, right, and sideways just by blowing their nose and saying they're going to, do something. That's not right. We got out of the STOA funding thing and everything else, we get the least amount of money of everybody else. We couldn't even get, when Senator Croce wanted to put in a resolution that Suffolk County would at least get the same amount of money as the county that got the least amount of STOA funding, and we couldn't even get that. Last year, we got, on the STOA funding, we got a 1% increase of $500,000. Nassau County got $1.5 million. They have the same number of people. They have 1/3 the land. They can run buses 12, 15 minutes at a pop. Yes, we have issues here, but half the problem is we can't get any operational money. We can buy buses. The federal government, the way this thing works between operational and capital money is not the issue. Operational money is. We don't have enough people. They said they're going to make new schedules. I was told last year we would have these new schedules by the end of October. We've gotten one schedule changed. And they didn't even change the timing on it. They just changed basically when the bus was going to start. But they don't even go and get on a bus and see how long the bus actually needs to go from point A to point B. This is not your basic county. There are too many cars on the road. You have parkways, you have expressways, you have a lot of commercial drivers coming from other states that have no idea the difference between a parkway and an expressway. That's why your bridges get banged off left, right, and sideways. Yes, there's a ton of bridges that need to be fixed. It's an ongoing thing. But, everything seems to be right now all about bicycles and railroad trains. Well, if you don't have buses to get people there and you're going to keep wanting them to take cars, you're going to end up having a parking lot. I mean, for years, the Long Island Expressway was always, that was the joke of the day, was it was a Long Island parking lot. Well, still is. And the problem is, so is Montauk Highway getting that way when you go out east. So is Sunrise Highway in the middle of the day at the Oakdale merge. Something has to be done. And what happens when there's a bad accident and the ambulances can't get there because they're jammed behind, there's no way for them to get around? This infrastructure and everything else is a wonderful idea. And all of this stuff is all wonderful stuff. The biggest problem is every time there's an election, you get new people and nothing seems to get done. And we come through and we do the same thing over and over again. Something needs to be done. I go to every meeting, every possible meeting I can go to. Everybody in the state, in the county knows me. Every legislator, for the most part, I've spoken to. They call me the big mouth of the county. Okay? I took the county legislators last year on Car-Free Day. I took them on a bus. 8 out of the 18 of them, I took them on the bus. When they came out with these new buses, I took 3, 4 different legislators on the buses. I didn't have to say one word. I called up DPW later in the day to ask if somebody had called, and they told me, oh, well, we got a call 5 minutes after he got off the bus. I don't have to say another word. Everybody knows what the issue is. Nothing ever gets changed, and we need real change. And I just hope that people in this county and people in the state from other counties will speak to the people here, to the legislators, to all the people here, to know what Long Island really is. This is a very vast area. We have our low-income areas. We have our very high-income areas. There's a lot of economy here. There's a lot of money that goes to the state here. We pay more than our share to the MTA, and we get nothing in return. There's a lot of ADA issues that just fall by the wayside. There's a lot of things that really need to be looked at. And I know you can't fix everything in a day, but things really need to be starting to get fixed. Otherwise, we'll just keep having these meetings every single year over and over again. And, I'll be saying the same thing. So I thank you very much for your time. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Pressman, for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us. And again, you made a good point that this infrastructure and things like this shouldn't be a partisan issue. It should be bipartisan, and this is about public safety, and everyone has an interest in our public safety. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Mr. Palmisano. Very good to see you again. All of my former colleagues, new members that I didn't have a chance to work with, good to see all of you down here in Suffolk County. My perspective is a bit unique, having served here in this body in Suffolk County Legislature as state assemblyman and now as superintendent of highways for one of the largest townships in the United States, not just in New York. We have 3,700 lane miles of roadway here in the town of Brookhaven, and as Congressman Zeldin pointed out in the congressional hearing, only about 20 or so miles of that is federally funded interstate highway. So while most of the roads that we deal with fall under the control of our local municipalities, specifically me here, we are largely responsible for the maintenance and repair of these roads ourselves without a great deal of outside funding. Now, I do want to thank members of this body that's before us here today, and I know I was one of the people who was sounding that alarm back when I was there about increasing funding on the state level, specifically CHIPS funding. And while I am certainly grateful for programs like Pave NY and severe weather recovery, and I am very grateful that you have found a way to get those programs funded for more than 1 year at a time, so we have some semblance of continuity in our budgeting process year to year. We all know that the much better solution would be to see an increase in our base CHIPS formula. Very specifically, a doubling of our CHIPS allocations would be a very good start. And we talk about this being a nonpartisan issue. It was once famously said, there's no Republican or Democratic way to fill a pothole. Well, the CHIPS formula is very good in that it allocates funds by the amount of road that you have to maintain, regardless of who is in control politically of that town, county, village, whatever it may be. So from a sales pitch standpoint to your colleagues around the state, obviously, an increase in the CHIPS funding should be an easier lift than I know in reality that it is. While I know that New York City is the economic engine and hub of our state, and having just driven back from Virginia over this 3-day weekend, I know that that little 5-mile radius circle in and around New York City is a nightmare for traffic and requires a lot of attention and investment. But any one of the major infrastructure projects that are going on right now across New York City, and there seems to be no end to their approval, many of which start with a B as far as the dollar figure for their funding. If you took $1 billion of one of those projects and invested that back here on Long Island, instead of the 2 parking garages that the governor proposed in his infrastructure plan for Long Island, we could do some amazing things. My paving budget annually, with CHIPS allocation, with grant funding, depending on how successful I am year to year, is anywhere from $16 to $20 million. Very fortunate that Congressman Zeldin was able to get us money through the Safe Bridges Act to replace an individual bridge over Sunrise Highway. And we're now working with the State Department of Transportation to move that project forward. We're in the final design phase. That one project to replace one bridge over one road is $24 million. One bridge. My entire paving budget annually is less than that one project. So you see really the almost insurmountable hurdles that we face when we are trying to get over that hump. And it's not unique to Brookhaven. For many, many years, decades perhaps, infrastructure was an easy target. When budgets needed to be cut, they trimmed out of infrastructure. It was a poor decision then, it's a poor decision now, and the trend is slowly reversing itself. But we need much more. When I took this position 5 years ago, I can't believe it's been 5 years since I left the Assembly, but I looked at this and I said, I needed a 3, a 5, and a 10-year plan to get to where I needed to be. And it's been 5 years now, and I think I'm slightly ahead of where I thought I would be, but it's going to take me every bit of another 5 years to even get to the point where we are doing planned maintenance. Right now, we are still putting out fires. Right now, we are reactionary in nature, as is, I would dare to say, every other Department of Public Works across New York State. It is just a fact of life for us as whether we be elected or appointed officials who run highway departments and Department of Public Works across the state. We look at this worst first. We need to reevaluate at the end of every winter as roads continue to come apart. Some we may have planned for, others deteriorate much faster than we had hoped and wind up leapfrogging other roads that we wish we could get to that year. So each year when we decide on our scope of work, I know for me personally it's the most frustrating part of my job because I start with a stack of work this big that I know needs to be done, and I'm able to select this much. So I know I'm going to make a few people happy, and I'm going to make a lot of people unhappy. And that is perhaps one of the biggest changes from leaving the legislative side of government, where you always did your best not to tell people no. You would always try to find a solution. I find myself in this executive capacity now, constantly telling people, no, I do not have the money. No, I will not be paving your road this year. And I tell my colleagues on the legislative side of government, just try saying no once in a while. It's quite liberating. But in all seriousness, it's an incredibly difficult position to be in, knowing that, especially here on Long Island, across New York State for that matter, we are paying some of the highest taxes in the nation, and we are not able to provide the basic, the fundamental services that our constituents expect for those tax dollars. When we talk about a town, there are basically two basic things people expect when they pay their taxes. They want their roads taken care of, they want their garbage picked up. And the fact of the matter is, for me, I am not able to provide the level of services that I know that my constituents deserve. And it comes down to simple funding and getting additional funding, not only on the state level, but specifically some of those big dollars on the federal level, whether they were passed through the Department of Transportation and actually found their way down to local roads instead of being commandeered for major city projects, as they so often are, would be, again, I would call it a windfall, but quite frankly, it's what we deserve on the local level. It's the reason that I come up to Albany each March in advance of the budget season, and we have a very simple mantra, which is local roads matter. And we will continue to beat that drum. And I thank Assemblyman Palmisano for being one of our biggest cheerleaders there and has always been, I know will continue to be. But this really has reached a critical mass for us. When you talk about those numbers, with bridges. I know that gets a lot of attention because bridges, obviously, if one fails, when vehicles are driving over it, we don't want what happened in Italy to happen here in the United States. We consider ourselves much better than that, but we are approaching those situations in areas, and we want to make sure that those situations do not occur here in the Empire State. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to all of us, and I'll be happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for those words. You're a wealth of knowledge, having been in this seat. And as you certainly know and recall, that my esteemed colleague to my left says no, that probably more than all of us combined. That being said,
I
that's
saw
why we
the
love
little
Mike.
side eye there when I said that.
Yeah. But seriously, just generally, are there any regulatory issues that come to mind now that you've been on that side that we could deal with for the procurement processes, or anything that would come to mind that we could actually would help to streamline your troubles?
I certainly understand, and we're all in the same boat when it comes to unfunded mandates. And it was something that we talked about with school districts, but we face the same issues on the public works level. The federal government decided that they were going to change the American Disabilities Act standard for handicap ramps, and specifically the grade of the ramps, the landing area at the bottom for turnaround, and this all makes our sidewalks and our public areas more accessible to those who are disabled, and that's a very good thing. But just like our schools, when a school wants to do anything to a building, they have to bring everything up to the current code. And it becomes very expensive, cost prohibitive, and a lot of times maintenance is put off as a result of the fact that they can't afford to do the entire scope of the project. Well, we now find ourselves in the same position with roads. I just applied for a $1.5 million grant on a very heavily traveled section of road because I can't afford to do all the concrete work that needs to be done in order to pave that road. And if I pave that road, before I pave that road, I need to bring all of the concrete up to that new standard that the federal government says has to be done. So I can't pave that road unless I do $1.5 million worth of concrete work. I simply don't have the money to do that, so that road is patch upon patch upon patch upon patch. And I really have no other choice because I don't have the money to do that. So unfunded mandates like that, we have to understand the law of unanticipated consequences. And when those sort of decisions are handed down, there has to be a commensurate amount of funding for us to be able to accomplish those, or find a way to allow us to continue to maintain in kind. Just like if we have an existing drainage system, we are allowed to maintain or replace that system in its current design. The state, DC, says we are allowed to do that because many times redesigning that entire system up to the current standards would be sometimes impossible because there's an absence of land necessary to provide the proper drainage area, or simply cost. So giving us the ability to maintain our infrastructure in its current design would be very helpful to us instead of running into a situation like I have right now where I'm hopeful that I get this grant, or else this road, I'll probably set money aside over the next 3 years and hope I can get to it by then. But other than that, it becomes very difficult for us to comply with these new standards that are handed down to us. And if we do, it obviously reduces the amount, the scope of work that we're able to perform on an annual basis.
Dan, a quick comment first, and I do have a couple quick questions here, if I may. Certainly, you've highlighted on the very important issue that's been brought up in all our forums so far about the importance of local infrastructure, particularly your CHIPS program. That's something that our conference has been a strong advocate from the days you were there as well. And the fact of the matter is, obviously we have the CHIPS program, Pave New York, and Extreme Winter Recovery that's kind of lumped into that formula. And something we have been advocating is to try to just increase the CHIPS base aid because Pave New York expires in 2 years. Extreme Winter Recovery, the governor, like last year, didn't include in his budget. And then we had to fight to just restore that money that was cut. Even though you say he's not cutting CHIPS, it's still a proposal to cut to local infrastructure. And the fact of the matter is, and for those who are here, 87% of the roads in New York State are owned and maintained by our local municipalities. 52% of the 18,000 bridges are owned and maintained by our local municipalities. 48% of the miles driven are driven on our local roads. And that's why it's an important thing that we're going to continue to talk about. It's something we continue to hear about throughout these hearings and forums. The example you just gave about the mandate was an example we heard at an upstate rural area. So whether we're here down in Suffolk County or upstate, those same mandates, they just weren't doing the road because they couldn't comply, and that's the problem they have. I did want to ask a couple questions relative to some state issues. One of the questions, I don't know if you guys have run into, the Bridge New York program has been touted, a very important program, but some of the concerns that were brought, especially by some of the smaller towns, I don't know if you guys are having similar, maybe some of your colleagues here, and some of the smaller towns are saying that the Bridge New York application has changed from the first year where it used to be a one-page application. Now it's like a 6 or 7 page application, which becomes a little bit more difficult unless you have engineers to help with filling out the paperwork to complete. Have you, heard anything about that? And my next question is relative to CHIPS. One of the other questions we heard is, sometimes there's specific requirements. You have to meet certain criteria to be eligible for CHIPS reimbursement. Some have asked if there's more flexibility with the CHIPS program is that something you think that would be more helpful to you or and some of your colleagues down here?
In speaking with many of my colleagues, I certainly feel it would to have that flexibility. I know that I am not the average bear, so to speak. Brookhaven is so large that I don't have a problem finding qualifying purchases for the CHIPS funding because I am spending so much more. We always like to kid. Some of my colleagues will say, "Oh, I wish I had your money. I wish I had $18 million." And I said, "Well, you don't wish you had 3,700 miles of road to maintain. I promise you, it's all relative." Again, with the size of Brookhaven, I have PEs on staff, so those type of applications are not as difficult for me, but for many of my colleagues, especially in some of the smaller municipalities, it becomes prohibitive, if not a complete impediment to applying for those because they don't have the money to go out for professional services, to have an outside entity complete those for them. So that would be very beneficial from a regulatory standpoint for many of my colleagues from smaller municipalities. And as I said earlier, this isn't just about Brookhaven. It's orders of magnitude. We're all in the same boat. Whether it's Geo Woodson in Riverhead with a couple of 100 lane miles of road, or me with 3,700 lane miles of road, my problems are just magnified. He has percentage-wise, he has about the same amount of money to do the same percentage of the work he needs to get done as I do. So, this, and I use him as an example because that's, one of the smaller municipalities like Southold also. Really, this problem, like you said, whether you're upstate, downstate, larger municipality, smaller municipality. But for me, though, some of those issues, from a professional services standpoint or a CHIPS eligibility standpoint, because my department is so much larger, I find it easier to comply with some of those issues. But when we talk about maintenance versus construction, it's a very important distinction. Anything beyond sweeping a road or cutting grass is considered construction, or patching a pothole. Even if you replace a traffic signal, so you have an intersection, you have a traffic signal go bad, you want to rebuild that signal. Well, you can't rebuild that signal without changing out all the sidewalk and handicap ramp at that intersection. They consider that construction, and it immediately triggers bringing all the infrastructure up to the current standard. So what started as maybe a $150,000 project turns into a $200,000 or $250,000 project by adding in the upgrades to a road you're not even paving. When you start to look at how those improvements are triggered, when you start to look at what is considered maintenance versus what is considered construction, again, that would be very helpful to us to be able to repair and maintain our infrastructure in kind. And if we decide to do an improvement project, then it is obviously up to us to either find the funding through grant sources or fit it into our capital budget. But that would be for the local municipality, staying within its tax cap and its debt cap and its spending cap like we do in Brookhaven, to be able to figure out and plan for on an annual basis.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. Again, I appreciate it.
Next, we're going to call up two people together since they're from the same town. Jay Card, the Highway Superintendent of Shelter Island, and John Cronin, the Town Engineer for Shelter Island. I know you had a long drive, so thanks for coming.
Just hit the button under the mic, Jay. You'll see the light turn green.
We're good? Okay. So as Superintendent of Highway for the town of Shelter Island, probably one of the smallest towns in the state, compared to my colleague, probably the largest, it's relative. So I have 50 miles of road that we have to deal with. And I'm not going to reiterate a lot of the things that Dan said and kill the time. But what does it mean for us? So Dan's CHIPS money seems like a lot, is a big number. So I went to the gas station and I said, what does this mean, like tax-wise? How much money are you collecting at the pumps for tax money for gas? And at the time, I think I was getting about $123,000 or so. And I say, you don't have to tell me exactly, but can you give me an idea what this means? And he says, I collect double that and more, and that's one gas station or two, and probably 80% of the people buy all the gas off island because it's cheaper. So right away that says to me, we're not getting our fair share of funding coming back. The people in Shelter Island aren't receiving their share fare. So luckily, we've been receiving some grant money to take care of some of the paving needs. In the very beginning, when we came into the 2% tax world, before my time, I don't felt that we came in a proper way, probably. I think we were kind of shoestringing it, trying to figure out how to come in, and we weren't really ready. I feel that I can live under a 2% tax cap operationally and manage that, but we weren't prepared for the infrastructure. So infrastructure has been struggling. And for us to try to claw back and make positive strides to replace what we have, we're going to far exceed the number. And I think right now we're looking at like a 16% budget that we have submitted at this point, and most all of it's infrastructure. So there's no way that that's going to fly. So I don't know if there's any way going forward that maybe capital projects aren't viewed under the 2% tax cap, and we would be able to stay underneath an operational budget. That would probably be meaningful for us. John, you have anything?
Yeah, one thing that I would say happens, which, with all due respect to the governor, I attribute to a peculiar, if not conflicting, policy. And that's, as Jay said, we do try to operate under that 2% budget cap. But at the same time, the governor has mandated shared services. And as that program has gone on in Suffolk County, and I have worked intensively on it for the town of Shelter Island, one of the things that's been cited is that shared services is meant to take advantage of excess capacity. And occasionally, the county is pointed to excess capacity in the area of public works. At the first shared service meeting that I went to in the county, I pointed out that there was certainly nobody in Shelter Island who had excess capacity. And I said, since the county appears to be implying we do have excess capacity, I'd like the county public works department to help us on Shelter Island. And a voice in the back in the room piped up and said, we don't have any excess capacity either. So there's a conflicting message that comes from the governor when he insists on a 2% budget cap and yet wants to endorse shared services, implying that there is somehow excess capacity. We on Shelter Island, and as Jay said, we may be one of the smallest municipalities in the state, but we are literally cut to the bone. I'm not even a full-time town engineer. I'm a part-time town engineer because the town can't fund a full-time engineering position. So it's not only a question of finding the dollars to take care of the infrastructure, but it's having policies that don't appear to conflict with one another. And I would submit that the 2% budget cap policy and shared services conflict and really send the wrong message about what we're trying to do. Thank you.
One of the questions you asked Dan about trying to streamline the process a little bit, when we do receive grant money applications and we apply for paving or for use of that funding, is there a way to trickle that money down into the CHIPS program somehow? And submitting the grants and trying to get all the paperwork squared away with them, they probably don't deal with it as often as the people in CHIPS do. And I feel that would be a huge help for us to streamline and get the money turned around for us faster.
I think that's part of what we're trying to do here is to get those types of ideas. I mean, one of the question I wanted to ask you, because a lot of times when we hear about the MTA, the governor said that the MTA is like the lifeblood of New York City. But for small towns like yourself, a lot of the towns I represent upstate, the CHIPS program is like the lifeblood of their infrastructure program in the municipalities. Sometimes some municipalities, what they receive in CHIPS is all they have to spend. You made a good point about, paying the gas tax at the pump. Not one penny of the sales tax on gasoline goes into dedicated infrastructure. We collect about $1 billion in sales tax on gasoline. $520 million goes to the state. The other half goes to the municipalities through the allocation. But not one penny of that $520 million goes to dedicated infrastructure. Half of it goes into the general fund, and the other half goes in to pay for sales tax revenue bonds. I mean, if $520 million is more than we spend in the entire CHIPS program across the state in and of itself. I mean, I think that if I read from research we've done, New Yorkers pay about $4.7 billion in driver-related fees, whether it's sales tax on gasoline, whether it's petroleum tax, other taxes and fees, DMV fees. Out of that $4.7 billion, less than about $2 billion is going to dedicated infrastructure. We have a dedicated bridge and trust highway fund where not every penny of those dollars are going to that. Some of it's going to the general fund. That's been one of the things that we've heard about time and again on this issue. So
do you know how much the MTA is receiving over the CHIPS program?
the MTA, one of the fights we had a couple of years ago was to get parity between the DOT capital plan and the MTA capital plan. So both plans we were able to get parity. It was about $27 billion. But you think about $27 billion for the MTA, out of that $27 billion DOT capital plan, I mean, that's for the entire state's capital plan. The allocation for CHIPS is about $438 million annually. And then you have $100 million that's going just for municipalities, about $100 million for Pave New York being divvied up between municipalities, plus the $65 million in winter recovery. It's about $600 million that's going to local infrastructure right now. Granted, on the positive side of that, that's about, if you look at where we were 6 years ago, if you look at that breakdown from where we were 6 years ago, it's about 50 to 55% more for each municipality in the state, what they were getting 6 years ago. But the fact of the matter is that there's a tremendous unmet need, billions and billions of dollars on unmet need. That's a good start, but it's not nearly near where we need to be, and that's why we have this annual push every year where highway superintendents like yourself come up to the state to advocate. Last year, and it should be, as one gentleman mentioned, this should be a bipartisan issue. When you get 142 legislators to send a letter to the governor and legislative leaders, that's more than 60% of the entire body. We shouldn't have to. You think we shouldn't have to beg and plead when we got that type of support for an issue like that, because this touches everything. And every dollar you spend in the CHIPS program is one less dollar that comes from the local property taxpayer. Every dollar you spend in the CHIPS program will save $6 to $14 in long-term rehabilitation costs. We talk about economic development. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox. Talk about economic development. It's nice to have an interstate, but businesses locate in towns, villages, and cities. So attraction is it for a business to go into a municipality if the local infrastructure is a mess? Same thing on tourism. You have a night, it's great to come into an area for tourism, but if the roads and bridges are a mess, public safety, how many of us put our kids on a school bus every morning? God forbid there's a tragedy. The whole point of this task force is to be proactive and not reactive to a tragedy. And that's hopefully with input, like we've been hearing already at the two previous meetings, what we're hearing today, we're going to come up with a plan and we're going to aggressively push this forward with the governor and legislative leaders. We don't care if anyone else wants to take credit for it and take the lead with it, but we think there's good ideas out there, and that's why your input, because there's municipalities like yourself that are so dependent on these programs like CHIPS, and these regulations sometimes get in the way. And so we're looking at ideas on what we can do, what recommendations we can make moving forward with the DOT, with the administration.
Right. I mean, since we've been actively use the money and doing the chips and the paving, I can't tell you the compliments that we get from the people that are coming from the city, that are running and jogging and biking and walking the dogs and all those things on the roads that are now becoming safe, when, really before they were unsafe. So it's making a definite impact as far as tourism and the way Shelter Island presents itself. Just on another note, we have 114 that cuts through the center of the island, goes ferry to ferry. And we talk about shared services with the state. I have a really good rapport with the county. We work very well hand in hand. I feel that we do have some sharing with them. But the state on the other side is all take. We rarely ever see the state. The plowing budget that we get from them, I don't really think is reflective of what the actual costs are. They are isolated, and we are an island that have to come. I really threaten to not want to plow it, because I'd like them to see what it actually entails. And then we do all the other stuff that they don't do, when we never see anything back from them on any kind of give back. There's no, well, listen, we'll throw you some money back for, the sweeping that we do, the mowing that we do, the emergency call-out stuff that we do, picking all that stuff up in the middle of the night, and there's no share on them. It's one way. So that is one thing I'm not really happy with.
Is that stuff that you're required to do? Is there like an agreement between you and the state, but then you're doing it, but they're...
Right. 2 years ago, they came out and wanted to sit down and reach some form of formal agreement. And we drew up basically what we feel on an annual basis we would spend to take care of things in their absence. And it, total like 10 grand, which isn't a lot of money. They were very quick to never call us back again. We haven't heard boo from them. So it's one way with the state in my mind.
One more quick question. With the CHIPS program, one of the things we've been hearing, especially from smaller towns, that if there was some more flexibility, and I asked the question to Dan, more flexibility with what you could use the CHIPS program. Sometimes they have a quote-unquote 10-year useful life, but, one of the things that were brought up is like crack sealant and things like that. Being able to use some of that money for that, you're going to help improve the infrastructure the best you can at that point in time versus having to do certain things. Would that flexibility be helpful to you? Do you recommend that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the small staff, we do crack sealing when we can. This year, we're going to really try to pound in some drainage with these 5 and 6 inch rains that we've been having. We haven't had a lot of impacts. So we're really going to try to focus on some of that, where really I would like to do crack sealing, but I can't do it all. I got to pick one. So people's houses that are flooding and people that can't get through road segments, we're going to address that. But you're right, it would be nice to be able to address those specific maintenance needs.
I just want to say one quick thing about, we talked a little bit about shared services, and this was brought up in some of the other task force meetings we had earlier this past month. And one of the themes that we heard back from a lot of municipal leaders is, shared services is not some new idea. And if you talk to the county leaders that I serve with up in Putnam and Westchester, they've been doing it for years. And the reality is, how much further can you stretch that rubber band? And I understand that some of the frustration is that they almost feel like there's some sort of punitive thing here because they're not qualifying for things that they have been doing for years. It's really only those new projects. So I think that's being received by a lot of people throughout the state, and that's something that I'm sure that we'll be sharing as feedback as well. I just wanted to let you know that as well.
Thanks. I mean, I would love to see the state step up and share. You know, it's their baby. Why not? I don't see their highway department coming to us and say, hey, we have a vac truck. Let's come do some of your drains and you guys mow our grass. I don't see that. Apparently, they only have 1 or 2 vac trucks for all of Suffolk County, and they have 1 or 2 hot boxes. You know, I asked the local rep to come out and do some work out in the island for us, you know, take care of his road, and he says, oh, well, I can't do it because I only got 1 hot box for Suffolk County. He doesn't have the he doesn't have the tools to do the job. He doesn't have the manpower to do the job. So I don't expect to ever see the state share anything, which isn't right. You know, I wouldn't have a problem going out dealing with issues for them on their road. Come paint some lines for me. You know, come do something for us. But it's one way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your time. I'd like to call up Leslie Kennedy, Suffolk County Legislator, and very helpful in letting us get this room for tonight. Thank you very much.
Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you for coming out. Thank you for taking this on. I was only going to speak about 2 issues, but I want to ask a question that came to me when Paul Pressman was speaking. Why is it that Nassau County gets 2.5 times the funding than Suffolk County, which is almost 2.5 times its size, for buses? I know you don't know the answer to that. If you could look into it, it would be greatly appreciated. It is, it's really getting ridiculous. This has been going on year after year after year, long before I was a legislator, back when Donald Blydenberg was the presiding officer of the legislature, and I was a legislative aide, so that's God knows how many years. And it's the same unfairness that we in the county bear. Suffolk County has numerous roads. I could beg on individual roads. We need money, we need assistance. But what I'm here to talk about is a commitment was made on 2 roads in my district. My district, you're in my house, and this is my district. I have 2 of the 4 major east-west thoroughfares in my district, one of which is 347. Some people say they did a marvelous job on the part of 347 that they finished. Other people are not happy at all. The speed limit has gone down to 45 miles per hour, which causes people a great amount of pain. And the road is constantly filled at this point. But what happened is that the state ran out of money. I can tell you exactly why it ran out of money. But when it ran out of money, it just ended the road. It did a left-hand merge into 2 lanes of book traffic, which constantly causes minor accidents. And it took the rest of the asphalt and dumped it on the side of the road to make, I can't figure it out, part of a bike path or maybe part of a walking path that dead ends. They didn't fix a pothole after that. They didn't do anything. So it is extremely disturbing to have beauty in some areas and then just death. And it's dangerous. The other state promised event was, Doug, what was that, 2 years ago? It feels like 100 years ago. We had New York State DOT come down to Center H or Selden. I can't even think of what it is. Center H is still my district. I go from the Huntington border all the way into Center H, so I have Smithtown and Brookhaven. And we spoke about Jericho Turnpike, also called Middle Country Road, which is the other main thoroughfare. You couldn't ride a bicycle on the road with the amount of potholes and craters in some areas. In Selden, it's horrible. They agreed that things had to be done, and they were going to do from Center H to where they ended in Smithtown. We're still waiting, and we haven't heard anything. So the communication is poor. If we could get some answers from the state, And if a government is not known for its ability to listen, I told the state that they were doing something they shouldn't have done. You don't build a sump over 90 feet of clay. I had some unfriendly words with an engineer. They didn't do any kind of testing to see that I wasn't lying. And now we flood 347, and their answer was to plant non-indigenous cattails and take away a stream bed in a high groundwater area that cost $1.8 million prior in federal grants to be remediated so that our groundwater didn't end up in people's basements. So I'm kind of angry that the communication is poor with the state. I'm just asking that when the state makes a commitment, they follow through, and if they don't have the money to follow through, well then, for crying out loud, just tell us. Let us move forward. Let us tell the people, that it's not going to happen. So, on that friendly note, thank you again for coming out, and
Thank you so much, Leslie,
All right.
for coming here. Leslie's been an advocate, and you mentioned New York 25, which is, we share that in our districts.
Yep.
Now, just to let my colleagues know, the 6-mile stretch that you're referring to of New York 25, which spans from, I believe, Queens through the North Fork, 6 miles in our district, every single day we have an accident, multiple accidents a day.
multiple
We have an injury almost every day, and we've had multiple fatalities per year.
multiple fatalities.
So it's something that we have been in touch with the DOT and asking them. They have committed to doing a corridor study, so we're still waiting on the results of that. But it has been quite some time, and I know both you and I have been in touch with the state DOT on that, so we're going to be following up closely on that. But it's dangerous, and it's definitely
very.
So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, gentlemen.
Next, we'd like to welcome Vincent Hartman, Chief of the Central Islip Hoppage Volunteer Ambulance.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here and shed the light on emergency medical services in the area. So my district is a very unique district. We are one of the busiest emergency medical service ambulances in Suffolk County. We're responsible for 7,000 calls a year. Year over year, we increase every year with at least 5%, if not more. Things that we notice is an increase of response times to families' homes and also to the hospital for our patient. This is solely due to the traffic in the area, as well as the congestion on all the major highways. My district is quite unique. We not only travel on local roads, we travel on state roads and county roads. 495 for us at any given time, especially during rush hour, to respond to a motor vehicle accident, it's very hard to get to. There's no shoulder for us to get onto. Cars do not move out of our way. And for the last 10 years that I've been part of this department, it has increased dramatically in the response time. We've seen an increase of VPEDs, vehicle versus pedestrian. We've seen an increase of accidents on the railroads and also an increase of just plain motor vehicle accidents. If we were able to create a infrastructure where we can have more town-based stores and accessibility for our residents to travel to by using public transportation, this could alter the effects that we're experiencing now. A lot of the patients that we do pick up state that they don't have accessibility to the hospital for themselves to go to, whether it be using a public bus or a train or some type of other mode of transportation. We solely more increased our, with the public transportation itself, there's more Uber drivers out there, which increases the cars on the road for us. Navigating to a house is impossible. especially during the rush hour times. From anywhere from 6:30 a.m. to about 7:30 at night, it's very tough for us. After that, traffic dies down, and we're able to properly navigate and get quicker response times to our residents and get them to the hospital in a safe manner. Next 10 years, it's going to get worse for us. Even with the potholes on the roads, patients are experiencing pain. So if we do hit a pothole, these ambulances don't have, floating bags where they're able to not, disperse that energy somewhere else. They're going to feel it in the back. And, when we're trying to, if a patient's in cardiac arrest, it's very hard for us to work in the back when we're going for potholes and braking for traffic without any express lane to get to that hospital. Sometimes it deters us to go to a certain hospital at certain times. We would have to take them to another appropriate hospital to handle that patient's need. Stony Brook is one of our level 1 trauma centers, and if it's during rush hour, we're going to be landing a helicopter for that patient versus traveling them to the hospital. Not only with the response times, but the safety of my crews, and I can probably speak for all of EMS on this side. We do have an increase of accidents with our ambulances, solely not because of our fault, just because of people, too many cars on the road. They're not paying attention. They slam into us, or they run a red light and hit our ambulance. But we've in the last 10 years had an increase in ambulance accidents. That in itself has increased a lot of other type of funds that we need to put towards that ambulance now, whether it's repaint the bumper or put a new tire on it, whatever the case may be. Those resources that we could have used for patient education and training now has to go back to the ambulance. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast at this moment for us. Any questions, concerns?
Yeah, Chief, I've actually, prior to my role here, I volunteered and worked in EMS in Westchester and Putnam, so I just want to say thank you for all you do for the people that you serve. 7,000 calls is quite a number. I think my little ambulance corps was about 600 calls, so that's there's a bit of a gap there.
Yeah.
But so I just want to say thank you. And one question, I obviously you pointed out some very concrete examples of how our infrastructure needs have actually delayed transport of a patient in need to a hospital, which is, that could be life changing. Or life ending.
Yeah.
But speaking to the safety of your crews, one of the laws that we've had in place for a few years now is New York's move-over law.
Yeah.
And for the safety of your crews while you're working on a scene, do you find that people are aware of this law, that they're honoring it, that they move over for you? It's obviously you and even highway crews now.
If you're referring to 495 or any of the local or state roads, no. They don't move over. I do when I'm in my civilian car, and I see whether it's a tow truck or a fire truck or ambulance. I do move over. We've had numerous experiences with traffic not moving over. It gets to the point where we have to put a fire truck to block that lane just for the safety of everybody. Suffolk County PD tries their best to enforce that law, and when we respond to an MVA or any type of emergency call, they try their best to enforce and make sure that we do have a clear path and a clear area for a safety area for our crew and for the patient that we're picking up. But yeah, I would have to have a strong no with that and say that it's not been effective.
That mainly is, it's not necessarily awareness. You think maybe that's because of
I think it's a
ability to
lack.
move over,
I think it's a lack of care.
Okay,
I think it's always posted on 495. New York State law move over. For a emergency vehicle on the side of the road. I think there's too many people on the road for them to actually try to get over. I also don't think there's enough safety net of, they may see the lights, a quarter mile off on the side of the road or in the middle of a lane or something like that, but they're not able to get over because there's too much traffic on their left or right side.
Understood. Thank you. I really appreciate your comments.
Chief, go ahead. Chief, just a real quick question. It's kind of a general question, but if there's something that, I know you mentioned like more public transportation, but if there's some steps the state could take to help first responders like yourself and I know a lot of this comes down to dollars, but is there certain things you would recommend that we try to look at, maybe best practices, things you might see in some other areas, what you could recommend to us to, as we move forward?
To be quite honest, the way that towns are built now, everybody has to go somewhere else to get their groceries or travel X amount of time to a certain, village or whatever the case may be. I think if we kept the citizens in their own town and had more accessibility, whether it's sidewalks, like I said, we do have an increase of, bicycles versus cars and, injuries of that sort. There's not that many sidewalks in my district. Certain areas of our district has plenty of sidewalks, but if you go into Hauppauge, there's barely any sidewalks. Central Islip does have a good amount of sidewalks where they're utilized, but if we're able to create more modes of transportation for my residents, whether it's walking distance to a local CVS or to their local supermarket, or having that notion of if I'm going to walk to that supermarket, I'm not going to get ran over by a car. I think if we're able to work on certain areas of improvement of just walking traffic or bicycle traffic, and allowing them to have that type of transportation, that would increase our ability to navigate better, because it takes those cars off the road for us, which is a huge help for us. In terms of the safety for my crew, I think stricter enforcement of that law should be put on. I had an experience where cars weren't moving out of my way, and I had a Suffolk County police car right next to me, pulled them right over, and took care of that person who failed to pull over for us. The yielding to our emergency vehicles is ineffective. That's another issue that we're experiencing. They're either just stopping dead and center in the road, or moving to the left when we're supposed to go to the left and they're supposed to move to the right. I think the education of what to do when you are experiencing an emergency vehicle and the proper way to navigate away from us so we can get through is definitely some type of tool that can be invested in.
Chief, I just wanted to say first, thank you to you and your members for what you do for our local communities. And when you talk about volunteer emergency personnel, I know, just to give everyone an idea, I know fasting, that's more directed on volunteer firefighters, but it gives a perspective. If the services you provide had to be paid services, it would cost an additional $3.2 billion annually in property taxes. Mm-hmm. So not only are you protecting your citizens, you're protecting the taxpayer as well. So just please send our thanks to all your members for all you do each and every day to keep us safe, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, before we go to the next person, we just want to note that we do have a representative, Ed Guerrero, from the New York State DOT, who's here taking notes and listening to everything being said here. So thank you.
Next, we're going to call up, if it's okay, two people together. Mark Fisher, Deputy Inspector, Communication Records, the 4th Precinct of the Suffolk County Police Department, and Walter Langdon, Sergeant of the Suffolk County Police Department.
You going first? Okay.
Well, I'm Mark Fisher, Deputy Inspector, Suffolk County Police Department, and I want to say thank you tonight for having us here, and thank you for taking the time to listen to the concerns. I'm not going to be very long, but I will tell you that everything that you've heard tonight is accurate on all angles. I will tell you that I started, much to my chagrin, and hopefully we don't put this in the minutes, but I know we will. I started in 1978, which, if you do the math, a little over 40 years. In that time, I've noticed a difference in a lot of factors in Suffolk County, a lot of issues. 4 specifically, congestion. There has been a deterioration of the roadways. Population has increased, And I don't think we've always kept up with the engineering as we should have. As we know, a lot of our parkways, they were built way back when in the time of Robert Moses, and cars have advanced and people drive a lot differently than they did back in the 40s and 50s. I don't know if that we have kept up with those kind of technological advances. But it's all created issues, more accidents, more people, more problems. One of the other things that I've noticed too, and it's not in my precinct, but maybe Walter will talk about it in his precinct, is we've, in Port Jefferson, on the 25th, we've had a flooding issue down in Port Jefferson. And it's kind of amazing to think, because I have some photos here of when it happened with Sandy and Irene. And I believe I also have another hurricane here that had happened some years in the past. But on the 25th, it was the same issue of just cars getting submerged, people in restaurants who were eating, and the water just flowed in. And I have a picture of the fire department, who are the first responders, and they got washed out also. So we have a lot of serious concerns. And again, it goes back, I think that would be an engineering issue. But population increase, as I said, deterioration, as we talked about, all issues that they're real. I've seen them. I don't have the great statistics like everybody else had. You guys were great with the number of miles and the number of population, but I can tell you from my observations, it's a problem. So I just want to say thank you, and hopefully we'll be able to get a little more aid from the state.
Hi, I'm Sergeant Walter Langdon of 6th Precinct CSU. CSU and the 6th Precinct pretty much is the precinct's version of Highway Patrol. Everything the ambulance chief pointed out, we observe every day. My team, Okay, better? Okay. Everything the ambulance chief pointed out, we witness every day, and we're doing constant enforcement. Speeding, stop signs, traffic lights. With the congestion, people have less patience. They're more reckless. Sometimes you pull people over and it's someone you wouldn't expect to run a red light or be speeding along, and that a lot of that has to do obviously with the congestion and stuff on Long Island. The inspector's a little bit older than me. I got on in 1988, but I can say that from when I first got on, the population, at least in the town of Brookhaven, has quadrupled. And with that comes the cars and the use of the roadway and everything else. He spoke about Port Jefferson. Port Jefferson, I guess we could call it a bowl of soup, because that's what it looked like that night. Cars were stuck everywhere, not just down in the village, some side streets in Suffolk, up in Pocart, Belterre, roads that normally don't get flooded out, got flooded out. So we had cars literally stuck everywhere. Like the inspector said, the fire department, they were flooded out. They had a local theater, which has like a bar that runs down. The bar was flooded out, so the people had to leave the movie theater and were out on the street. That was because of that heavy rainstorm that we had. So it wasn't even a hurricane, it just was that heavy rainstorm. Eventually it receded after about 2 hours, and that we had some trucks come down from the town. They were pumping water out. The village had some vehicles and stuff there pumping water out, but definitely something has to be done down there. You can't have that happen again. And I can only imagine if there's a bad hurricane, what's going to happen down there. And the worst part is you may not be able to get to some people and that. So that's pretty much all I have to say.
Thank you so much for coming, and also thank you for your help during our Middle Country Road when we were taking a look at New York 25, trying to get the information regarding that. That was very helpful. Now, I have a question related to the Long Island Expressway. Now, I've heard certain members of law enforcement have asked me about the fact that there's no law in the books that requires people to move over. There's a passing lane is to your left. Do you have any feelings on whether that should be discussed, on whether maybe, I've heard this from state troopers who have said, you have a 3-lane highway and people are kind of, going slower in the left lane and it's really congesting the whole. Do you have any feelings on that, or?
Well, some people, my own personal observations, obviously I pull over, but I have witnessed a lot of people pulling over. I think you correct that with education. I know on the expressway there are signs and that letting people know, in case you forgot, if you see a police officer that has a car pulled over or there's an accident scene, you're to move over 1 lane and that. So I think that's something you just correct with education. And obviously, if it's a real major problem, we'll try and correct it with enforcement.
I can pull a little age on that too. When I learned how to drive, the left lane on any highway was always considered the passing lane, and the right lane was the merging lane, and the middle lane was just the lane. We've all experienced where people do 20 miles an hour on a high-speed road and they're sitting in the left lane, and so a lot of that has gone by the wayside over the years. So as Walter said, it's an education issue. It's a common courtesy issue in many cases. But I'll also add in areas like 25 and 347, and I've been witness to this both on and off duty. I drive an unmarked car on duty and my own personal car off duty, and I've been stuck in traffic and had an emergency vehicle, a police vehicle, one of my own people, and I couldn't get over because there were cars to the left of me, cars to the right, or in certain highways like County Road 83, there's a drainage ditch which either is there or it's encapsulated by a guardrail so you can't get over. There isn't enough shoulder to get over. So a lot of times, because of the congestion, people just can't get over, and I'm sure Walter's has been in a position where you're hitting the lights and our ambulance people, but there's no place for them to go either. So that's a result of engineering and congestion once again. Thank you.
What you do.
Thank you.
Before, I had a quick question for Jay and John before you leave, before I call our next person up. I forgot to ask this question when you were up, but one of the suggestions that has come up at some of our past meetings, and I know being a town officials, is because we have the CHIPS program, which everyone seems to like, but certainly water and sewer infrastructure is a major challenge for a lot of our municipalities. The idea has come up, and there's legislation that's been introduced in Albany to create a CHIPS-like formula to provide assistance to municipalities to help improve their water and sewer infrastructure. Number one, would you be a supporter of that? Would you think that's a good idea? Number two, the same topic came up relative to, I don't know if your towns have culverts. I know a lot of upstate communities have culverts. To create a similar type program, like an allocation based on the number of culverts, or maybe even include bridges in that. Is that something you think would be received well, or would be good to have a separate line item for water and sewer and for bridges and culverts as part of like a CHIPS-like formula?
Right, for us, the culverts don't really reach the magnitude for the minimum threshold for a lot of those projects, so we don't even really partake in it. We have one sewer plant on the island that's privately held, and we have a municipal golf course that is just up the hill, which is a perfect fit to get the water out of the Peconic Estuary area and onto dry land. But there's no way to have, I believe, a grant written for that to actually work. So that would be helpful if there was a way to have some type of mutual agreement between a private entity and a municipality. That could fly. I mean, it would be a wonderful thing.
The majority of the wastewater in Suffolk County, at least heavily true on the east end, is handled by septic systems. And there are some programs in place right now to help citizens fund the new design septic systems which reduce nitrogen compounds going into the environment. But certainly any program at the state level that could increase funding for that kind of work, I think would be certainly a real plus. The second point that you raised about water, Again, 73% of Suffolk County is on public water served by the Suffolk County Water Authority, but 90% of Shelter Island is on private wells. We have some very significant water quality problems on Shelter Island that include saltwater intrusion and high nitrate levels. So again, funding that could come from the state that would help address those issues would certainly be very welcome.
Anything that streamlines anything to be more along the CHIPS program, where it's easily accessible, return on the money's quick, is something ideal for a small municipality like ours. We don't have the ability to lay a lot of money out for a long period of time. And if we're going to do a grant program, we have to lay out that money. It really becomes problematic. I can't do a whole grant at one time. I got to, pare it over a couple of years to actually pick the project off. So the CHIPS program, because you return the money so fast, really would be helpful.
And just to further clarify what John was saying, that my district goes from Mount Sinai to Orient Point. So I used to have Shelter Island. Actually, Dan LaSquadro may have had Shelter Island before it was redistricted in 2010. But we have a community preservation fund in the 5 eastern towns. So the North Fork, South Fork, and Shelter Island takes 2% of a purchase with some excluded money. There's over, I think it's probably about 150 or 200,000 is exempted, and then over that, the seller would pay that, and it goes into a fund which was essentially for land preservation. But we now, I guess it was 2 years ago, we included in the budget, and we now are allowed to use 10 to 20% of that money up to for water quality issues. So this has been an ongoing problem with the east end, particularly of Long Island, because in those 5 eastern towns, most importantly, with all of our estuaries and nitrogen concerns and overgrowth and algal blooms, from an ecological standpoint, we've had some real serious issues. And in Southold, the easternmost district, it's similar to Shelter Island, we have so many septic issues, and you can't sewer those areas just because the water table is so close to the ground. Obviously, they're only at 4 or 5 foot elevations at best, some of these homes, and we don't have the infrastructure. It would cost billions of dollars to try and sewer that. So the denitrification systems are very important for your own self-contained septic systems, but something along those lines that we've dealt with it on the state level, just for that kind of a local option, I guess is what it was, and we've now extended it to 2050. But from a general regional aspect, I think that's something that we should really keep in mind as well, that the sewer issue isn't always just build a sewer, that in some of these more rural areas that the cost would be prohibitive, that maybe even providing mechanisms for folks to just upgrade their systems so they can control their nitrogen output through their own septic systems.
I know we're focused on the nitrogen right now, but there are pharmaceuticals and other things that are showing up in the water.
Right, and I think there's some PFOA that's been showing up on the South Fork. It might be on its way from, I guess it's from different, the firefighter foam, and that ultimately has been leaching into our groundwater. And the different aspect about Long Island is we're a single source aquifer, so we drink from our groundwater, not like most other areas of the state.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dawn Marie Sherrock, Middle Country School Board member. Dawn Marie?
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this evening. While it's very important we speak of our roadways and our infrastructure, it's also very important that we speak of the safety of vehicles on our roads. It is estimated that over 50,000 motor vehicles illegally pass stop school buses on a daily in the state of New York. There are school buses. Our district is one of them. We're fortunate enough, all of our school buses have cameras on the outside of the buses. So if once the arm is out, the flashing red lights are on. If a car does pass, the driver can press a button and it takes a couple of stills. They then give it to Transportation Department, who sends it up to Albany, and then Albany sends a warning letter to the registered owner of the vehicle, which we know by these statistics that really isn't meaning much. The safety of our children are at stake here. We talked about safety of our school bus. If there's an accident, God forbid, just getting on and off of the school bus can become an issue. I've seen it in my district. We see it across. It's something that's very widespread. I started last year on our committee that we're on. We did a school bus safety awareness campaign, kind of piggybacking off of how some motor vehiclists do not know what to do in a situation, even just stopping for ambulances, police cars moving over, which direction to go. I really honestly think it's partially an awareness, because when we discussed some of the rules, people had no idea. Like, each state is different. In New York State, even on a divided highway, you must stop for a stopped school bus, no matter which side you are on. People were amazed. They did not know that. They weren't aware of the actual amount for the fines. They weren't aware that you have to stop in a school parking lot. If that bus has its red lights flashing, you cannot pass it in a school parking lot. So there were just some things that were eye-opening to people, which you see on a daily. And like I said, I've seen people not know what to do when there's an ambulance. I think we need to kind of have an awareness. I also know that the Senate has passed a bill for the cameras for legislation on the outside of the buses, what to do with it. I know that there is a bill that is in the Assembly. It's right now in the Codes Department. And I just ask that this be something that is a top priority. And I also ask that you're mindful of the language in the bill, because school districts have a lot of unfunded mandates. We can't really afford to take on another unfunded mandate. There are also school districts that do not have the cameras on the outside of their buses yet. And for them to be able to have to put that money up front to install these cameras, I have read the language of the bill as it is now. I'm new to all this. I'm trying to learn all of this. And some of it just, was a little, I wasn't sure exactly how it was being worded or exactly what was meant, and some of it is the collection of the funds. My understanding is that from the language of the bill, it's saying that some of these monies will be given back to school districts. I was just curiously wanting to know who decides that amount, how much will that amount be? Is this going to be something that's written in stone? How is that language going to be? I don't want to advocate for something that's going to be a burden for school districts, but I do want to advocate for the safety of our children. We cannot have 50,000 motor vehicles illegally passing stop school buses every day. That is a tragedy waiting to happen. So I please ask that you make this bill a top priority. I don't know if maybe you'll be going back into session or session a little bit earlier, and these be one of the topics that you can discuss or kind of move to the top of it, because I think this is something that we need to take serious. We need to be proactive, and this is something that is a serious issue.
Thank you so much, Dawn Marie, for advocating. You've been a great advocate for Middle Country. The bill that, for my colleagues, the bill that she's referring to, I don't have the number of. Do you have the number?
Yes, I do. It's 321-B, and I know the Senate was 518-B.
And what that bill actually says, because school districts do not have an ability to levy fines, it allows the place where the infraction takes place. In our case, it would be Suffolk County mostly. For Middle Country School District, it might also be the Village of Lake Grove. And it states in the bill that a portion of the proceeds from the fines would be given to the school district to reimburse for not only the installation, but also the maintenance of the cameras. And it said that's a minimum. So it could be greater than that, but at minimum it would cover the costs.
Right, as long as it covers the cost. Like I said, I don't want to advocate for something that's going to put a burden on school districts, but we need this bill passed, because right now we have the cameras and they're basically useless, and it's dangerous. I've seen it. Cars just have no disregard, and you have a lot of students that are crossing the street. You have a lot of students that are excited to run home, and God forbid, how we need to fix that so that we don't have to deal with the tragedy on this. So, and if I'm here if you any questions or anything that I can do to help, but I'm just really curious. I just want you to be mindful of the language in that bill as well. So, all right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn Marie. Our next speaker is Anthony Portese, sorry. With a name like Palmisano, I should be able to do that, but.
So good. Italian last names are never easy, right? So just very quickly, I want to thank you guys for having me tonight. Again, my name's Anthony Portisi. I was actually the Democratic candidate in 2017 that ran against La Squadro. But I won't be partisan. Infrastructure is not a partisan issue. I'll tell you, though, since I ran, I've become almost obsessed with it. Primarily, I liked a lot of the issues that were brought up tonight. They're very, very important. Statistics. Let's just go into statistics very quickly. For every $1 we spend in infrastructure, how much do we get back? $3 in economic activity. That in and of itself is something that we should be looking at in terms of the economic development aspect. So I just want to talk a little bit about the town of Brookhaven, and Dan spoke a lot about how big our township is, and we have 3,650 lane miles of road. In fiscal year 2012, we had $12 million, and as Dan pointed out, this year we have $18 million, which shows you the town council does realize that the dilapidated condition of our infrastructure. But how do we fix that? How do we come up with solutions? And it's something that I've racked my brain. The other highways, the highway superintendents that are elected have racked their brains about it. So now, $18 million, that's really a drop in the bucket compared to how much the town of Brookhaven has to do. To put it in perspective, despite the budget increase, what we're really looking at in Brookhaven is the equivalent of throwing a cup of water at a forest fire, just because of the amount of work that has to get done. So we have 3 solutions here. Solution 1, we suspend the debt cap and allow Brookhaven to put out a 30-year bond for $100 million so we can make a dent in the amount of work that has to get done. And based on my going around town and my computations and numbers, I'm an Excel spreadsheet nerd. I do this stuff, for fun. We have about $117 million in work that has to get done between road reconstruction, between sump infrastructure that has to get fixed. And one of the things that's not really discussed, and you guys kind of touched on it a little bit, is water drainage. So one of the biggest impediments to, when you fix a road, you want to make sure that the water drainage is proper. And we have over 1,000 drainage basins here in Brookhaven that are overgrown with shrubs that are it's just impossible with our highway budget to get it done in terms of trimming it, in terms of updating the plumbing, that sort of thing. It's just something that, needs to get looked into. Now, the last part that I want to get into, I don't want to be a windbag here. We talked a lot about CHIPS tonight. One of the issues that I have with the CHIPS funding in particular is the formula. The formula goes based on what? A, vehicle registrations, and B, it goes based on lane miles of road. So of course, Brookhaven gets their fair share from the lane miles of road, but the vehicle registration is not really that accurate. So we have about, I believe last year we had 387,000 residents. That doesn't mean we have 387,000 cars. We have middle-class families, especially here in Brookhaven, are doing everything they can to save money. So that involves sharing cars. Junior's driving dad's car to work when he gets home. Things like that. So what you have is you have cars that are traveling all across Brookhaven, and the formula doesn't really allocate for that. So I just think that maybe we can talk about maybe changing the CHIPS formula a little bit to make it more fair toward the bigger municipalities. And I know some of the members of the assembly up there from upstate might not be too fond of that, but it's something that we really should discuss in terms of equitable fairness. Because and I have the calculations. I'm more than happy to email it to you. Herkimer County. You guys familiar with Herkimer County? Herkimer County has about 60,000 residents. They get as much CHIPS funding as the town of Brookhaven, and that's just equitable and fairness because we have 5 times the population. And it's something that we need to look at. What's the solution? I don't know. But I think maybe we can talk to, who's the chairman of the Transportation Committee? His name slips. Yes, David Gant. So maybe we can talk to him and maybe we can get the committee going. I know Dean Murray's on that committee as well. In terms of just allocating a structure that better works for bigger townships like Brookhaven. Because as we've pointed out ad nauseum here, the town of Brookhaven has a lot of infrastructure that is decaying that needs fixing. So I mean that's pretty much the only thing that I had to talk about. And maybe there's some exception we can do to the debt cap, and where we can have a temporary suspension of the debt cap to get the bonding issues that we need. Because as I forget who pointed out, I think Mr. Palmisano pointed this out. What is it, 83% of the roads are under the jurisdiction of the private, 87? Exactly. So maybe there's something that, the legislature can work on in terms of easing the debt cap. Maybe it can have a sunset clause. It doesn't have to go on forever. And maybe it could just be limited to highway infrastructure or to sewer infrastructure, which I thought was a very good point, because sewer infrastructure is going to be the defining issue in the 21st century here on Long Island. And we've talked about that as well. But that's pretty much all my points that I wanted to make tonight in terms of let's just get a more equitable fairness in terms of the CHIPS funding so, we could do a little bit better here in Brookhaven. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If, as far as people who contacted us beforehand, we went through that list, but I know a couple other people came in. I don't know if you'd like to speak. We'd like to have anyone from the audience who wants to add their thoughts or opinions or concerns. We'd please come forward. We'd love to hear from you.
I'll say a few words.
Great, thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and I appreciate the invitation. My name is Kevin Himes, and I've been on the board of the Ronkonkoma Chamber of Commerce for the past 11 years. And I see both problems and opportunities that we can accomplish here. So basically, as Assemblyman Smith mentioned, a lot of the roads infrastructure was built when Long Island was growing back in the 1950s, 1960s. We need to do the proper studies and the engineering work to update them to today's traffic and standards. In particular, I see a big issue at Middle Country Road, Route 25. Approximately 6 years ago, I approached my assemblyman prior to Mr. Smith. It was Assemblyman Graff. And I said, the months of November and December are extremely tough to cross Middle Country Road or to make left turns. The traffic, it's completely bumper to bumper during the holidays leading up to the Christmas period. So I said, well, let's look at starting the installation of left turn signals. Been a tremendous amount of accidents going on, and I'm sure statistics will back that up. So it took 5 years to get one turning light installed. And I see a problem with that. We should get these results much faster. If there's a need, let's get the work done.
I have to speak to that because that's something that had kind of slipped my mind, but you had approached us, I think, in 2012, November, December 2012.
Right.
So we sent a letter to the DOT regional office. We received a response back. We were asking for left turn signals at 2 intersections, and it was over a year later we received a letter. It's one of those things where you forget about it until the next holiday season. You say, what happened with that? So we followed up December 2013. We get a response, I think it was mid-2014, that said, we disagree with you on one intersection, we agree at another intersection. That other intersection where they agreed to install the left turn signal, I think was another 2.5 years later. So that was... Yeah.
And the result was it took 5 years to install one left turn signal. Now, I still think there's a need for at least one additional left turn signal. And all of this should be taken into account. The areas along Middle Country Road 25, Nisconset, Lake Grove, and Center Reach, they're just awful come the holiday season. The roads are jammed, and the accident statistics are just off the charts. So anything that the state could do, I would really appreciate that, and so would the community.
In a similar vein, I grew up in Patchogue, in civilization, but I now live in New Suffolk, town of Southold.
And Southold, yes.
I understand your pain, but try to make a left turn near my house now with the pumpkin patches and the winery. So I get it.
Right.
We totally get it. And, we did have some similar issues because, 20 years ago, people on the North Fork were saying, the South Fork has all this tourism and their businesses are booming. We want it. You need to do something. Now that tourism has been promoted, the North Fork is now discovered and turning into Manhattan. You've got all these cars everywhere, and everyone says, you got to get rid of these cars. This is awful, so you need to be careful what you're wishing for. But I've had a very similar issue in my district. Along in Mattatuck, there was an issue on 25A over
Yes.
in that section of Brookhaven. And the wrinkle was this, because we had we wanted restriping, we wanted to redesign the intersection that was a 5-way intersection. And the bottom line is, and we've had some really good discussions with them recently, and it just slips my mind who the regional DOT, is it Brown? Yes. Remember when we just recently had a meeting with them a few weeks ago, that they prioritize, just in a similar fashion as Dan LaSquadra was saying before, on a statewide level. And the lane miles in the rural upstate, not to be too kind to my friends from upstate, but really they have such a huge priority list, and then we have a bad winter, that projects such as that, they almost, you can almost justify and believe them to an extent. I'm not defending them because all I do is send nasty letters to them. But that is really a fairly plausible position that they take. So, and we get your pain because we, as certainly as legislators, as you know, now Doug's is in the membership. You know, people get very impatient with that, and you don't blame them. And all we have to do is just say, please hang in there. They will get to it, and they will put us on the list. But that's something that I think Doug's going to have to do tomorrow so that he can get it done. You know,
Gave you some work to do.
2021. Yeah, right.
The one at the main entrance to Smith Haven Mall at Marich's Road, but they do need other ones too. I just wanted to say, if you've been in downtown Patchogue, they've had some good low-cost solutions over the last few years by putting in those striped crosswalks and signage. New York State law must stop at pedestrian crossings. If we do more of that, that could encourage drivers to be safer as well.
Good point. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Would anyone else like to please come forward? Please come forward. Thank you. Thank you.
My name's Peter Wolfman. Some of you may know. But anyway, the red light cameras. I'm not bashing them. All I'm saying is the no turn on red. I was listening to a first responder before saying how he can't get through. 95% of the time now, I witnessed this sitting there. An ambulance will come up to an intersection that out of nowhere turns to a no turn on red. Now, Suffolk County, you were always allowed to make a right turn on red. They pick and choose where they're going to, or out of nowhere, no turn on red. Like, for example, the one on 347 there and Pond Path. Now you were able to make a right turn on red, 30 years. Out of nowhere, here comes a red light camera, no turn on red. I got a ticket. I didn't know. But what I'm trying to say is, for the first responders, when they come up to that intersection, nobody wants to go. So they don't want to move. They're like, no way, man, I'm putting the brakes on. I'm not moving for this ambulance. I'm going to get bagged. So either we're going to make it no turn on red in Suffolk County, or we're not. Like New York City, when you enter into the city, there's a sign that says right there, you can't make a right turn on red in New York City when you enter the limits. In Suffolk County, it seems we're picking and choosing with intersections. When the first responders come up with an ambulance, there's cars sitting there, they won't move. I've seen volunteer fire department guys with their blue lights going and everything trying to get there, and the cars will not move. They won't make the right turn on red. By Terryville Fire Department, they won't move. I've seen it. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. It's something to think about. Maybe, you have the cameras, okay, but the right turn on red, maybe let's ditch that. Also, the driving slow in the left lane, biggest pet peeve. Maybe we could take on Florida's laws, and they just made it now where it's points on your license if you're caught driving slow. Maybe we can add a little extra with, a free tasering as well. But that's it, gentlemen. That's what I wanted to bring to your attention. The first responder brought it, when he was talking about how people don't want to move, it dawned on me, I remember seeing that nobody wants to move during the red light cameras. So you guys have a great night.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. There have been a number of issues brought to our attention here in Suffolk County. Every time the legislature meets, people come and testify. And as state legislators, we are mindful of what testimony is given and concerns that people have on that.
That's why the first responders, I have a lot of friends that are first responders, volunteer, and that's one of their biggest gripes, is that they can't get, people won't get out of their way because they're afraid of that ticket. So when they come up behind them, people, I'm not going, And then the people that volunteer with the blue lights, they get the tickets as well when they go through them to get to the firehouse. And it's always the right turn on red. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. All right? Have a good day.
Would anybody else like to? Yes, please come forward, sir. Thank you.
just back, because everybody's been talking about Brookhaven and what a big town it is, okay? Want to just make sure that when we get transportation money, it goes to transportation. Because 2 years ago, they cut 12 buses in this county, okay? Out of those 12 buses, most of them, the biggest ones, were all in Brookhaven. That's the biggest town, and you can't even get to the Brookhaven Town Hall because the bus doesn't go there anymore. I mean, how are people that cannot drive anymore, how are the elderly supposed to get there? How are you supposed to get to Town Hall? And by the way, you can't get to Town Hall in Babylon either anymore. I live in Islip, and Islip's a very big town too. They have their own problems. That's for another day. But seriously, money has to go. If it's going to come from the state, it has to be written, as the other lady said about with the schools. It has to be written where the money goes, because unfortunately, our executives, and not just this one, but for the last 50 years, the money comes and it goes into a general fund, and the general fund is never for the people that need the money. So please, that's most important. Thank you very much.
How you guys doing tonight? I'm a truck driver, and I get to sit in traffic a lot and do a lot of observing. And aside from the fact that my 6-state area that I travel in, New York probably has the worst roads. New York State, Suffolk County, horrible. But I think a lot of the biggest problems that I face out on the road are people on cell phones. Yeah, texting and cell phones. And, you know, I don't do it myself. I won't do it because I know what the fines are, and I know how dangerous it can be. But I see a lot of truck drivers doing it. They're in the middle lane on the expressway. You know, they're not looking at the road. They got 80,000 pounds. And the people in the cars are ridiculous. So I think that we need some kind of task force or something to get out there and enforce these laws. I mean, the penalties are stiff, but I don't see them being enforced. I see highway patrol sitting there, and car after car after car goes by them, like this, like this. The young people, it doesn't matter, young people, old people, men, women, doesn't matter. Everybody's on their phones. And, you know, me driving a commercial vehicle, they swerve in front of me all the time. I hit the air horns. I get a phone call to my company complaining that I blasted them with my air horns. It's my fault. So I just would like, you know, the state to do something better to enforce the laws on cell phone usage.
What is your experience in other states? Is it similar that people are also using the cell phones? Or
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what the laws are in the other states.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, Massachusetts is horrendous. Connecticut's horrendous. Pennsylvania, not as much. But, you know, here there's just so many people, and everybody is on their phone. I'll bet you 10 cars go past me, 9 of them are on the phone during rush hour. And, you know, that slows things up because people, when they're texting or they're looking at their phones, they automatically slow down. They stop in traffic. Traffic continues. They sit there. So they cause that rubber band effect on the expressway worse than it's ever been. And it's slowing down commerce. You know, it slows down everything. It's costing everybody, including, you know, fatalities and injuries. And, you know, it's just, it's a bad thing. So I'm hoping we can get something done with that. Thank you.
Just one point, I know there is legislation in the Assembly. It didn't get out of committee this year, but one of the things that's being discussed is a textilizer bill. It's about a feature that law enforcement can use as a tool to try to better enforce those who are texting and driving or using a mobile device with their hand. They're still trying to work out some of the kinks. I think, you know, and see how this would work in New York compared to maybe other states. It's fairly new technology, but I've been involved in that. I think it's Felix Ortiz the assistant speaker of our chamber. It's his bill, and it was named after an individual who he lost his son to a distracted driving incident in Westchester County. And I know about that because I represent Northern Westchester. Is Ben Lieberman's son. So that is something that the legislature is discussing. The governor, I know, did approve a study on this particular bill because they didn't want to rush to judgment. There was some concerns about, being able to access information on someone's phone. But that is something that I know the legislature is looking into, and I know I'm looking into as well.
Okay. 287 has gotten better, and 684 as well has gotten a little better. Those roads were horrible, but they've gotten better.
You don't get to on it's Taconic. That's pretty bad, too.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to share their thoughts or opinions on this issue?
We're joined by our County Comptroller, John Kennedy. I don't know if you'd like to add anything, not to put you on the spot, but I wanted you to just note that you're here listening.
Welcome to Suffolk. So what would I offer to you from my take? An interesting perspective. As you gentlemen know, the policy-making body, the legislature, adopts what the priorities are. And it's my office that winds up having to go out into the market to go ahead and actually raise the funding associated with doing the whole myriad of capital projects that we do, whether it's roads, it's the culverts, it's the fencing. Just a couple of observations. It is getting more difficult to go into the market. We've been presented with a number of changes. However, I'll also say that the choice on the part of the administration to go ahead and pursue and utilize Environmental Facilities Corporation funding actually has been a positive. They're an excellent agency to work with, and as a matter of fact, as you gentlemen know, they will be the primary conduit coming through my office for the whole $300 million that is coming from Hurricane Sandy for the South Shore Strengthening Initiative associated with the expansions of sewering. We can talk about roads, we can talk about traffic signals, we can talk about a lot of other things. It's axiomatic, each and every one of you knows this, that we have to continue to promote expansion and connection of the sewering. At the end of the day, if we don't take the steps necessary to go ahead and address and confront septic issues, we'll be drinking desalinized water. And I don't know if any of you have ever drank it, but it stinks. It is not something that we ever want to have to even contemplate. And so I would encourage you, as you look at addressing infrastructure issues, please make sure you keep sewering funding and sewering construction at the top of that list of priorities. We got to be able to move around, there's no doubt about it. But absent having expansion and construction, the one initiative out in Shirley, as you know, is construction of a brand new SDP. And when I served in the legislature and did quite a less of a job than my successor, I was an advocate of construction of an SDP for the Ronkonkoma Hub project. So I think that it is extremely important that you keep your eye on the ball with that one, as I know you have, and I encourage you to continue to keep the focus on that. That's my observations from where I sit.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to share your thoughts with us? Well, with that, then before I let our host, Assemblyman Smith and Assemblyman Palumbo, wrap up with their closing remarks, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you very much for your hospitality. Certainly Leslie for allowing us to use these chambers for our forum. It's been great since I got here. I walked into my hotel and I said, Phil P., guest of the day. So it's been wonderful. I just want to thank you for your hospitality. But I also wanted to say Again, thank you to Doug and Tony for hosting, but to all of you for coming out tonight to share your input, your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns with us. You know, again, the point of this task force is to get that input and feedback so we can put together a report that we can share with all of our colleagues and the governor moving forward. You know, we want to be proactive in this issue. This is a serious public safety issue. It impacts everyone, and it's something that shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's something that we should all be focused on. So, again, your help, your input is very important to that, and I can't thank you all enough for coming out tonight and sharing that. So, I'm sure Kevin would like to say a few words as well.
Sure, I just want to say thank you to everyone that came out today. I know this isn't always the most sexy topic to talk about, infrastructure and roads, but as all my colleagues have said, it's very important because everybody uses our transportation system. We're not picking winners and losers here. It benefits everybody when you invest in transportation infrastructure. And I just want to thank you for your valuable input, your time, and for allowing us to use this facility today. Thank you. And I'll introduce, how about Tony Palumbo?
Without being too repetitive, Leslie, thank you so much for securing this for us. You clearly hold the title of the best legislator in this district in probably 30 years. Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Comptroller. But thank you so much for being here. And for all of you doing this, of course, taking time out of your personal lives to give us this information. This is the sort of thing that greases the wheel when we get these ideas and we try and formulate legislation as a result. We, of course, will have additional input. We may come back to you for some information and additional help. But thank you again. It's a wonderful public service to give us this information so we have some more malleable information to work with. So thank you again. And go get them, Doug.
Just to close up, thank you all for coming. We've had a number of different forums across the state on domestic violence, heroin, Common Core, and education policies. And the work of the members of the Assembly that have traveled the state, and in this case, Phil Palmisano and Kevin Byrne, two people who I think know more about infrastructure, the most about infrastructure that I know. So we want to thank you for coming down and thank you for testifying. The report that they generate following the tour of the state and compilation of hours and hours of testimony, I know will get action done. You know, these types of things, we've seen meaningful action from changes in the law to protect victims of domestic violence, changes to give families the tools they need to help their families battling heroin addiction, and also ending Common Core, putting an end to Common Core and changing education policy for the state. So I have no doubt that this transportation and infrastructure task force will act similarly. So thank you all, and have a great night. Safe home. Thank you.
Yeah.